Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast. In a previous episode, we spoke about redefining Black womanhood, right? The need for a reform in regards to Black womanhood, what it means to be a woman, and all the ways in which our loyalty, right, to the modeling and the performing rather of strength has sent some women on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Making women perform to be doormats, to be doorknobs, right? In terms of like mentally, right? Just not really encouraging any type of intellectual capacity in regards to women and womanhood, right? We've gone so far as to see so many Black women now trying to cosplay as white women aesthetically, in mannerisms, right? And all these different things. And I think, like I said, I spoke about it in the previous episode, but we just kind of talked about the importance of just allowing Black women to just be women, right? And what does that look like? That just looks like being a woman of presence. That looks like being a nurturer and just allowing women to just exist, right? Without having to perform something, whether it's femininity or strength, right? And so go back and check out that episode. I hope the audio wasn't too bad. I'm actually using my headphone mic, so I'm hoping that this is kind of decent. But in today's episode, well, first of all, happy Black History Month, right? And if you tell any white person happy Black History Month, you will definitely see that we have a long way to go. All right. So for all y'all in the back trying to argue allegiance, you know, we don't need to talk about racism. It's the past. You know, Black people need to let it go. Tell white people happy Black History Month, and you will certainly realize that we have a long way to go. Now, okay, moving on. Moving on. In today's episode, I want to talk about being in the right rooms, right? Being in the right rooms, being around the right people. Okay. And we talk a lot about privilege today, right? We talk about who is privileged. We always really kind of reference being in the right rooms as like social circles and, you know, things like that. And we always kind of like to elaborate on such outlandish examples, right? Like private school and, you know, going to the network meetings that are gate kept, like, and we're just really reaching for the stars when it really doesn't have to be that complicated, right? When I think about being in the right rooms, and I think the importance of us being in the right rooms, right? Because I think that this is the reason why for many African American people, we really struggle to get along. And I don't want to actually, no, let me not say that. I don't want to say that like there's no camaraderie. I don't want to imply that we are constantly in strife, in battle, right? Now, we did address fearing the Black body, right, in the previous episode. So again, go back and listen to the previous episode. But that's not the avenue that I want to go. What I'm referring to is since the beginning of time, because I think of the dichotomous nature, right? The divide and conquer, right? Impetus of colonizers and all the things that, and the really the number that has been done on us psychologically, we exist in dichotomous frameworks, even if we don't want to, right? And so often I do believe that there is this need to defend, right? And to tear down others who may be, right, like we referenced Dr. Kunjufu's work, smart or popular, right? And if you would say smart or popular today, it would be more of a thing of like feeling like, okay, there's intellectuals and then there are people who are more, you know, maybe more socially aligned with certain aesthetics or certain trends, right? And we reference this when we talk about, you know, BBLs and things like that, right? And I told you guys this back in the old episodes. The BBL was symbolic of like a Chanel bag for Black women, right? Getting a plastic surgery for Black women, such as like the BBL, was a class symbol. Because it was something that not every woman was doing or could afford to do, right? Cosmetic surgery, by and large, is a class symbol. And that's why you see a lot of women today, even Black women, you know, getting these cosmetic procedures done because it's symbolizing a class issue. And, you know, we have to talk sometimes, and you know, mostly it's coming from racists, right? But they talk about segregation And now we're living in a world where we are heavily socially integrated in such a way that we are privy to the lives of white women in such a way that I do think we are losing the plot. I do think we're losing the plot because, like I said, we went from one extreme to the other, which was this embodiment of strength. And I don't even say it was embodiment, right? It was more so a performance of strength to just outlandishly, like just really adopting a lot of white women's customs, like I don't want to say customs, but like behaviors and like all these different things, right? And excuse me if I'm like taking too long to get to the point. I'm just trying to get my thoughts together because actually as I'm making this podcast episode, I am processing. I've also had coffee, so we low-key have a little bit of a stimulant going. So yeah, it's very interesting to kind of like see. But I want to talk about being in the right rooms because, like I said, I think for so many African American people, you may not have experienced certain things. You may not have had any type of experience with upward mobility, and so you have a lot of black people who are entering into these integrated spaces or these predominantly white spaces for the first time, and they feel as though they need to adopt certain type of social mannerisms, right? Instead of just existing, instead of just like being. And I do think, like I said, in terms of black womanhood, it being this thing of like, you know, again, very performative of like strength to cosplaying white women. And we got to talk about it. We got to talk about it because like I don't think that's the answer either. But I want to talk about being in the right rooms because I think for many African American people, I think this has always been a thing. Right? Like I said, when I was referencing Dr. Kunjufu's to be smart or to be popular, there's always kind of been this like divide within the black community where people who may be more trendy or socially, you know, inclined or whatever, right? Like in terms of like relevance, in terms of trends and aesthetics and all of that. And then there's always been black people who maybe don't embody that, right? And it's not because they're socially inept. It could be because they're just financially literate. I'm just being honest, right? We know that it is a culture that is highly, it is highly consumptive, right? And for a lot of black men and women who don't want to spend all their money, you know, buying the latest and the greatest, right? You can feel like you're out of the loop, but that's not always the case, right? And so a lot of times there'll be like certain events that, you know, will be very like materialistic centered, even if, you know, it's like a motivational speaking event or like whatever, like it still embodies this, it still draws the same type of crowd versus if you were to like go to some type of social justice event, like we can really sit and get down to business, right? And I think it's important to recognize that no one is greater or better than, you know what I mean? But I do think it's important for the people who do fit into the category of the latter, right? Who may be more into social justice or, you know, financial literacy, community building, right? Organizing, like all of that. I do think it's important for, and I would consider myself in that group, right? Like I do think it's important for us to find ourselves in the right rooms. You know what I mean? Because when you're in the wrong room, and I think this is important too, like I really want to speak to the black academic, right? Like I want to speak to and that's not to say that people who are not, you know, more so aligned culturally, you know, to a certain type of aesthetic or trend or whatever the case may be. It's not to say that they're not intelligent, right? It's just more so to say people have different interests, right? And that's just period. We don't really need to get into that. And you can't really argue that because you can look around within our culture and that's just irrefutable. You know what I mean? Like I'm kind of being mindful of how I say what I say, but that's just irrefutable. So that's just not even really like, you know what I mean? And I always said, I think it's unfortunate that we don't really get to come together. Like why don't scholars and entertainers kind of like come together? Why is this constant like putting against each other? But I think it's just, again, a difference in values. And I think that's okay. Right. Like I said, so let's get that out of the way. Like it's not about anybody being better or greater or lesser than anybody else. Right. But I do think it's important for those of us who do fall into the latter to be in rooms and spaces where, you know, people see you, people, you know, you show up and people aren't worried about if you got on designer or people aren't worrying about, you know, certain things that you may not be trying to convey. You know what I mean? Like it may not be an environment that's hyper focused on consumerism or materialism. Like, you know what I mean? But it's more so focused on what it is that you have to say. You know, it could be focused on like community organizing, right? So people are kind of there to build and really see you, not to kind of like compete or, stuff like that. And that's important because I think that there are a lot of us who fall into the latter, and we do start to feel a little bit more ostracized, within the Black community and even society by and large. But I think I just wanted to get on here and say it's important for you to be in the right rooms, because when you're not in the right rooms, you'll start to feel like your depth, the way you see things, the way you process things, like there's something wrong with you. And that's a problem, right? Especially if you are somebody who is, intelligent and you can make an impact, whether it's in your lives, your kids' lives, your community, like, you know what I mean? We need more people like that who are more positive, who are more, community minded, who are, kind people who do want to kind of show up in that way. And that's men and women, right? And we do need more, good role models, right? For your family, right? For other families. And so there's really nothing wrong with looking at things from a critical lens. There's really nothing wrong with being someone who, speaks a certain way or moves about the world in a certain way. And we got to kind of get to that point where we kind of start to say that, because I just think, far too often it's the latter. I mean, it's the former. And when people feel like they don't fit into that certain type of box, they start to feel like they have to. They start to feel like they do have to kind of buy into this to kind of, find some level of belonging with communities and spaces that are never going to reciprocate in the same way, So, I've learned to accept like who you are and to be somebody who has boundaries on how much you give to certain things. You see what I'm saying? Like for example, I tell you guys this all the time, like my relationship with social media is that in which you can't track me on there, right? Cause I'm constantly on and off, and I don't really care to be seen, right? Like I do share certain things online. Every time I think I want to kind of be in a certain space, like, TikTok, Instagram, I'm proven wrong every single time, right? I don't like what it is when things get to a certain level of like visibility, right? Because these are not my people. Like I'm not trying to reach the top of the, you know what I mean? Like there's something about reaching the top of the crop and like going so far up that like makes things so incredibly visible to a lot of people who shouldn't even be in this space, right? Not because they are unworthy or wrong, but just because this is not even for them. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, that's why I personally don't like social media. Like I just, to an extent, like it's like I personally don't want to deal with all that. You know what I mean? Because it's not for everybody anyway. I just wanted to get on here and say that, and I do think in being in spaces that are aligned with you, I do think that you will find yourself having better relationships. Obviously, like, it's kind of like a no-brainer, but you'll find yourself having better relationships because you won't have to deal with all that jealousy and competition that kind of comes from being in the wrong rooms or feeling insecure within yourself, right? Because insecurity is a very nasty thing, and it can make us competitive. It can make us jealous, but it can also make us self-sabotage, and it can also make us feel like there's something wrong with us. And so we go inward, right? And we don't feel worthy. And, when we show up in certain spaces, we're not really showing up entirely, or we don't believe that things are going to get better, or we may settle or try to conform, right? And try to be something that we're not. Like I know somebody who, doing great things, did great things in their lives, but this is somebody who wants to be caught up in mainstream culture. And this is a grown man, right? And I'm not saying that to talk about him in a bad way. I'm just more so saying that to say the hyper visibility of Black culture can be so, it can just be so alluring. You know what I mean? And it's something that really does bring about a sense of visibility, popularity, access, more friendships, more connections, like, all these different things. And it's like, it's enticing, but for a lot of people, some people ain't caught up in that. You know what I mean? And for the people who are not, who maybe do desire or are living a more quieter life, and, you can't keep up with that, right? You're not trying to spend your money, you're trying to save your money and all these different things. Like you can feel like, you're on the back end and you may not matter or whatever the case may be. And it's just not true. So I hope you guys got something from this. Like I said, this, I'm kind of getting back in the swing of like creating. So just bear with me, on quality, on quantity, on all the things, not just from audio, but even in me processing my thoughts. Like it's been a minute, but there are just some things I wanted to kind of just like say, because like I said, I think so many Black people struggle with low self-esteem. And I just don't think we have enough people out there encouraging people to say, I see you, even if you're not, even if you're a young kid, y'all know how it was back in the day. It really was a thing of like to be popular, to be smart, and then you get older and it's like some people carry that stuff with them. And even as adults, right? You don't, you're not trying to be this hyper visible couple online or, this hyper whatever, you know what I mean? And for some people, you feel like you kind of have to be in that space because so much of it is, you know, seen as the epitome of Black culture, Black success, Black excellence, right? And I don't think we talk about that enough. Like that boom in entrepreneurship and this really like flashy lifestyle, it's always pushed on some Black people. You know what I mean? Whether or not we want to adopt those values or not. You know what I mean? And so for the many of people who may reject that, who may have, some education of any sort to say, hey, no, this is actually why we're moving like this, who may have this level of consciousness, sometimes you don't have that level of visibility or you're around people who may be operating that way and you just start to feel insecure about yourself and you know what I mean? And that's not always the case. Like it's nothing wrong with you. You just got to get in the right rooms. Not everybody wants to think critically or sit down and have conversations and really be about social change, right? Not everybody wants to show up in a space and, be adults and have a good time and have conversation and you know what I mean? Like just be grown. Like, you know what I mean? Sometimes people just kind of want to, engage in surface level things and kind of, perform and whatever the case may be. And like I said, it's not either or, it's a way of relating, right? There are some people who could show up in certain spaces and they can relate to, different people in different ways. And it's not always a bad thing, but it is important for you to know like who you are as a person and what you're about and, get in the right rooms with people who can really celebrate you and be like, wow, you're really dope. Or, because that's real. And I think until you do that, you'll always struggle to feel like you don't fit as a Black person, like within the society, within maybe your family origin, like all these different things. And I think that lack of belonging really does eat away at our self-esteem. Like I said, you're already battling with, racism and all these different things. And then you're already battling with like family stuff, for many of us. And then you start talking about relationships and friendships. If you're battling in that area as well, it can make you hostile towards other Black people. So just be mindful of that, be mindful of being in the right rooms. And like I said, it's not about being better than anybody or anything like that, but it's like getting your lane, get in alignment with what you're about. You know what I mean? Get around people who like you and what you bring and all you come with. There are some people who, argue like, oh, at the end of the day, everybody ain't so deep or we don't always got to be deep about everything. And it's like, these just aren't your people, and people make assumptions about other people as well, right? We make assumptions about people so it's important to be in the right spaces and in the right rooms. And, it's not about being either or. It's really about being in your space. I think when you become an adult, like back to my podcast episode about the reclamation of agency, I think when you become an adult, you do have to take accountability for yourself, and you almost gotta, they say like in therapy, it's like reparenting yourself. But I think it's about like making choices and choosing to be in environments that uplift you, that, pour into you, that support you, that encourage you. Like that stuff is real. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to keep putting yourself in rooms where people are tearing you down. You know what I mean? Like whether overtly or inadvertently, you want to put yourself in rooms where people like you. You know what I mean? Like in 2026, relationships are all of that's like the bare minimum. Like, do people like you? Like, do they like you? Do they like what you're talking about? Like, do they like you? Or when you show up, are they happy to see you? You know what I mean? Are the conversations easy, or do you feel insecure? Do you feel you got a posture? And sometimes our insecurities can eat away at us, right? But sometimes the reality is that you really are in the wrong rooms. I think for myself, I had gotten so used to being insecure. I had gotten so used to constantly looking at myself, being critical, having such low self-esteem to an extent, right? To an extent, because I've always kind of had a, pretty baseline of confidence. I got to be real, and I realized that was normal for me. And it wasn't until obviously getting older, because that's just 20s, you live and you learn, thankfully, that I had a revelation. And I was like, there's nothing wrong with you. You just need to stop being in rooms that make you feel that way about yourself. And when I stopped doing that and I started aligning myself with what's for me, like it was tea, and the thing is, like, you can come together with certain people and you guys can have a good time and all the things, but like you can still, realize like, okay, you have limits. We all have limits, So we're ending this talk with boundaries. I hope you guys got something from this. Like I said, I'm back. I'm getting back in the swing of things. And I kind of am getting back into it, like full time, but I'm getting back in the swing of things. So I'm back creating, it's looking different. It's been a lot, and I'm glad to be here now. Like I said, I hope you guys got something from this. Peace.